Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream where we're going to be going over, I should say, why you don't necessarily need new workouts or exercises, but you need to focus on better execution. So before I do get started, of course, guys, I do want to mention a few things. You can check out my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. It is here on screen. If you're interested in learning more about online fitness coaching, it's there for you to access. There is information on basically how I structure online coaching. When you click on sort of the menu button at the top of my website, it does give you options that sort of will explain the program a little bit more. I do also have a way for you to check out my fitness blog, which is free to access, as well as some of the other resources that I offer. Any of my latest live streams are usually posted on the homepage of my website. So whenever those are recorded and done, I usually try to put those on the front page. So this one will be up shortly. Another thing too is that each and every Wednesday I do these live streams at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and then I also do live streams on TikTok at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time on Tuesday. So those are some of the streams that I do. I do plan on doing likely streams in other places. I'm looking for sort of a new sort of platform to, share a little bit more information. So definitely feel free to access, take the time to check out any of those resources. It's all free to access. I just want to share sort of the value that I have to offer as an online fitness coach. And of course, give you information that you can take with you today to make the most of. And that's pretty much the same with what we're talking about today. Whereas this is something that you can take with you and this can be used, right away if you do have an existing workout routine or if you're trying to sort of get it adjusted to a new workout routine. And I think this is pretty timely too, this particular topic when we're talking about New Year's and sort of understanding why, you need to focus on making the most of your existing exercises rather than constantly trying to change up your routine so often. So that's what we're basically going to be going over today. So there is a wide variety of points that I'm going to touch on when it comes to this topic. So I do want to share a few different things that we're going to be going over. So these are some of the points that we're going to be sort of touching on today as we go over this particular topic. So these are six of the topics, but there are going to be a few more points that I will discuss. I just don't have them all here on the screen. So we're going to go over muscle growth comes from tension, not novelty. Mastery builds results faster than variety. Poor execution leaks results. Progressive overload is more than adding weight. Better execution protects joints and recovery, and new exercises reset the learning curve. So these are all points that we're going to sort of be touching on when it comes to this topic of really understanding why you should focus on mastering your exercises that you're already working on rather than moving forward ahead in your workout. So, as we continue on and sort of get started, what we need to think about first is that when it comes to muscle growth, especially when we're talking about workouts, now I mentioned time and time again that muscle growth happens when you have a balance of different elements, such as, of course, your nutrition, your workouts, and your recovery side of things. So, what we need to think about when we approach the workout side of things is that we need to be strategic in how we approach that. So, muscle growth comes from tension. So, what creates tension when it comes to your workouts and really making the most of those workouts? So, the load, of course, which is your external resistance, when we're talking about load, that's basically, of course, weights, bands, body weight. It's basically anything that you're lifting in a workout is the load. Another thing you need to think about too is time under tension, which is what I've discussed before pretty often. Time under tension is basically how long the muscle is working through that exercise. So, like when I'm talking about tempo in workouts, and we're talking about sort of like 3-2-1 tempo or any tempo like that. Tempo is basically giving you sort of a number in the amount of seconds that you're spending with time under tension. So that's sort of giving you a better example on what we're talking about when it's time under tension. It's how long we're going through sort of that duration in the workout. Control as well is very important. So slow eccentric phases. Keep in mind that your eccentric phase is primarily your lowering phase in the workout. And the same can be said, you could emphasize still the same just as much as when we're talking about the concentric phase. So you've got both your lifting and your lowering phase, but you want to primarily focus on slow eccentrics and really taking time as you're sort of lowering the weight down and going through sort of the duration of the workout. You also need to make sure that you stay stable throughout your workout. Of course, that comes with, proper form and technique, as well as making sure that you're performing clean reps and that you're not cutting your reps short as you're going through the workout. Range of motion as well is a very important point to keep in mind. So tension through stretched and shortened positions. So as you're going through, range of motion, this is basically the best way to describe this is basically sort of how you're performing a single rep in a workout. So range of motion is where you're, of course, lifting the weight, pausing, and then lowering the weight. That's basically your range of motion in the workout. So what you need to think about is you need to emphasize more of the stretched and shortened positions. Again, basically what this means is this is kind of like talking about the slow eccentrics. This is pretty much the same. So you're lifting, of course, when you stretch the muscle, that's more of when you're extending, and then when you're shortening is more of when you're contracting. So you want to make sure that you focus on having a sort of controlled tension in both the stretch phase of the workout as well as the shortened phase. So why this all matters is that more tension is going to lead to stronger growth signal in the muscle. And it's also going to lead to less joint stress compared to chasing max loads. So it allows for progression without constantly adding weight. So this is again the same concept like I've mentioned before is that when you really focus on being intentional with the weight you're lifting, your existing weights, you don't need to emphasize so much of trying to lift the heaviest weight. You just need to focus on really making the most of the workouts that you're already performing so that you can really maximize that muscle growth. And again, it's all about how you control the weight, how you spend in time under tension with that particular weight, how you slow down your different phases in the workouts, your reps, and how you go through a full range of motion and not cutting your reps short. So it's all of those different elements combined that is going to lead to muscle growth in the long term. So as we're continuing on here, the next point we need to think about is mastery builds the results faster. So again, this is sort of expanding upon that topic of our existing weights that we're lifting. So mastery removes that wasted rep that you're performing. So for example, if you're lifting sort of a heavier weight, what you're going to notice is those reps are not going to go into a full range of motion. If you're not used to that weight and it's like an extremely heavy weight, your reps are going to be cut completely short. So you can't focus on that. If you have your reps really cut short and you're not going through a full range of motion, the muscle is not being activated entirely. So what you need to think about is really focusing on lowering the weight as you need to and mastering that existing weight that you're already lifting. You don't need to constantly, when it comes to like, we're going to talk about progressive overload soon, but when it comes to sort of progression and progressive overload, what you need to think about is it's not necessarily about trying to constantly lift heavier weights each week, but it's more of like sort of a certain duration that you're going through, a certain phase that you're going through, and really mastering that existing weight. So, precise execution keeps tension where it belongs on the muscle, not lost to momentum or compensation. keep in mind that with form and technique, when you're performing workouts like with a bicep curl, or even when we're talking about rows or anything to that effect, basically any workout, you don't want to have momentum to take over. And what I mean by momentum is just sort of letting, just swinging the weight or just trying to focus on really having other muscles compensate for the workout when you're actually, really changing the targeted muscle when you let those muscles compensate in your workout. So you need to focus on really mastering your technique, mastering the form in your workouts so that it's going to lead to stronger growth in those muscles. Clean reps are going to create higher mechanical tension with less load and less joint stress. So you can really maximize those clean reps, even if you're doing a lower weight, even if the weight is lower, you can really add more mechanical tension, which is more, muscle activation, more growth when you're using even a lighter sort of load, but you're focusing on going through a full range of motion in your workouts, as well as making sure that you are really controlling the weight and really feeling that stretch and extension in the muscles. So the nervous system also is learning efficiency when you focus on mastery. So again, the nervous system is sort of what is sort of determining your performance in your workouts. So if you notice that you have some days where maybe your performance is a little low, that you're not lifting the weights as heavy as you could before, that's sort of where your nervous system is kind of, I guess you could say, out of whack. And basically, your performance is sort of lowered because it's not in check. But when you focus on mastering sort of your existing weights and when you master that form and technique, then it's going to translate to really having more progress in your routine. So, mastery itself is going to improve motor unit recruitment, which means that you're going to have more muscle fibers that are going to be activated in your workout. So, it's also going to lead to more coordination, of course, more focus in how you're performing workouts, as well as a repeatable strength output. So you're going to be able to have that consistent sort of long-term strength in your workout. Progress, of course, compounds instead of resets. So when you focus on mastery of an existing weight that you're lifting, you're really adding towards progress, even though it doesn't seem like it initially because you're still lifting the same weight. When you focus on, taking your time with that weight and making the most of it, it is going to translate to progression as you master it. So it's going to make it so much easier to continue onward with progressive overload. So when movement quality is consistent, so when you're going through the form and technique in a proper manner, overload becomes predictable and sustainable. So I sort of got ahead of myself there, but that's the thing here is that when we focus on that existing weight, it's going to make it so much more sustainable as we're trying to really progress, especially when we're focusing on hypertrophy and muscle gain in itself. So you kind of have to think about that as you are approaching, your workouts, that you need to focus on those existing weights as much as possible before you decide to increase the weight. So the next point that I want to go over here is poor execution leaks results. So what does leaking results actually mean? So this means that your tension is shifting away from the target muscle. So like what I mentioned with the previous slide, what we mean, like when you're talking about compensation and when you're having sort of, you know, when you're having to rely on momentum, what's happening is that your muscle that you're wanting to target is not really being targeted because you're having to use all of these different support, sort of muscles to help with, your form and technique in the workouts. So you need to think about, really how you control the weight in your workouts so that that tension doesn't shift away from the target muscle when you're doing a workout. So momentum itself is going to replace muscular control. So when you're relying so much on momentum and you're swinging the weight, you're losing control of that muscle, and that muscle is not fully being activated, which in turn can actually lead to, an increased risk of injury in workouts. So joints and connective tissue absorb the load. So keep in mind when you're focusing on better execution, those joints and connective tissue are going to really, absorb that load more when, you think about this. So keep that in mind. The nervous system also recruits compensations instead of intention. So again, this is where your performance can kind of be affected if you're not having sort of, good control over your weights and really, thinking about how you are intentionally moving those weights. So this is going to really affect your nervous system and your performance as you're moving forward in your workouts. So same exercise, same weight, but a very different outcome. So that's what you sort of need to think about when we're talking about this point here. So as we're continuing on here, the next point that I do want to go over is basically discussing progressive overload is more than adding weights. So I've mentioned progressive overload time and time and again, but it is still an important concept to master. And if you've not listened before, this is something that you really need to take note of because this is the concept that you need to really get a grasp on if you're wanting to progress in workouts in general. So what most people think when it comes to regressive overload is about adding more weight, pushing harder every week, and chasing numbers at all costs. But that's only one tool and not the whole strategy. So, like I mentioned previously in a few slides ago, is that progressive overload is not about constantly trying to push hard every single week. It's a gradual progression. It's not something that you're just taking huge leaps each week because that's not how growth happens. It takes time to, build that muscle growth and to also make it sustainable in the long term. So what progressive overload really is it means increasing the training stimulus over time. And that can happen in multiple ways. So it doesn't necessarily, have to happen through weightlifting, or like through the existing weight that you're lifting, but also other ways. So you don't have to constantly focus on adding more weight. You can, focus on other different methods that are going to benefit you. So better execution, of course, like we've discussed. So that means cleaner reps. Of course, what that means by cleaner reps is going through the full range of motion, not cutting those reps short, but fully activating that muscle, going through the lifting and lowering phase fully in the workout. And then, of course, less momentum. So you don't want to swing the weight. You don't want to just lift the weight really fast. You want to go through that workout in a controlled manner. Another thing too is more time under tension. So when you slow down your eccentric phases and your pausing phases, this is going to lead to a sort of example of progression. So again, slower eccentrics, how we lower that weight down, lowering that weight slowly down, as well as pausing for a few more seconds as we're going in between from lifting and lowering, that can really help with progression as well. So improved range of motion is another thing you need to think about. Again, range of motion is going through the workout in the rep in a controlled manner. And also more reps at the same load. So what you could also think about is just adding more reps, but still using the same existing weight that you're working on and trying to master. So let's say, for example, we've been focusing on doing at least 8 reps for the past few weeks. Well, a way that you can add progression without having to rely on sort of adding more weight is to focus on, okay, let me see how much more reps that I can do this week. And if I can add 9 or 10 reps instead of just 8 in my workout. So more reps is still an example of progression. So keep in mind that progression does not have to be constantly adding weights all the time. Another thing too is that better execution protects joints and recovery. So when you have more control over your workouts, this is going to really help in preventing, injuries and of course, really any sort of muscle, imbalances that can occur. So controlled reps are going to reduce joint stress. So you're going to have more stronger joints as well. So smooth tempo also limits excessive shear forces on shoulders, knees, hips, and elbows. It's basically lessening sort of the impact that is, being, impacted on those particular muscles in the workout. And another thing too is that proper alignment distributes load correctly. So when you have proper alignment, of course, what I mean by alignment here is that we're having sort of a good alignment in how our form is and basically how our starting, sort of starting phase of the workout and how our stance is as we're getting started. When we have proper alignment, so for example, like with a lunge, if you see me talk about lunges, one thing you have to think about with lunges is that you're in proper alignment when you're doing that workout. So with lunges, you need to make sure that you're upright, that your spine's neutral, and that you also need to make sure that as you're going forward and you're stepping forward into the lunge, that your knees are going over your second and your third toes. So when you're doing that workout, that's sort of giving you an idea on how your alignment should be. So when you have proper alignment, you're going to distribute the load correctly and you're going to engage those targeted muscles more effectively. Another thing too is that when joints stack well, muscles, not connective tissue, absorb the work. So we want to focus primarily on those muscles doing most of the work. Less momentum, of course, is leading to fewer compensation patterns in your workouts so that it's, not sort of affecting that targeted muscle. Cleaner reps prevent stronger muscles from hijacking the movement. So a lot of times in workouts, when we're performing, even if we're performing, let's say, an isolated workout where maybe we're focusing on a bicep curl or maybe we're focusing on an exercise like a lat pull down, those are more isolation based movements. But if we're not performing the workout correctly and we're, sort of having a different, hand position or a different, way that we're, lifting the weight, that can lead to, basically other muscles, sort of being engaged. So even a small twist or a small, sort of movement pattern shift can affect the targeted muscle in that workout. So you may have supporting muscles that are helping that, particular bicep muscle, but those muscles are taking over and your targeted muscle is not being taken over, which is your bicep. So you have to think about, again, focusing on how you perform the reps in an effective manner. Another thing too is that new exercises reset the learning curve. So one thing I do want to mention when it comes to new exercises is that I do have my clients go through new exercises periodically, and usually it's for a month or so in between is when they'll go through new exercises. So what I do want to mention with new exercises is it's not necessarily bad, of course, to do new exercises, but what I do want to say here is that it's more important to focus on really maximizing the most of your existing workouts as much as possible before you decide to, move to newer exercises. So new movements, of course, are going to challenge coordination first. So what you need to think about when focusing on exercises is that if you constantly, day after day, we're not just talking about like month after month. If you're constantly, each time you go into the gym, adding new exercises, your challenge in your coordination is going to be, it's going to happen first. So the nervous system itself has to relearn patterns and improve focus and control. So when you're giving, your body new workouts to perform, it's going to have to adjust to sort of how it engages those muscles because it's a new movement pattern and your body's not adjusted to it. So lighter loads become effective again. So when you're getting started, you have to think about, if you're doing new exercises, you have to start with a lighter load because your body is just not used to that. And if you do too heavy of a load, even if you think you're strong in that particular muscle, it can sort of affect, and lead to, injury risk and things of that nature. So skill demand increases stimulus without needing heavier weight. So keep that in mind as well. So your weak links are exposed and addressed. So any of those weak muscles kind of come into effect as well, and you sort of notice those. New angles and ranges reveal gaps in stability and strength. So keep in mind that when you're going into new exercises, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's how you approach it with intention and how you approach it strategically that matters the most. So it's about making the most of those existing workouts as much as possible as you can. And what I would say too is when you should move to newer exercises is when you feel like you've really gotten comfortable with the weight and with how you perform that workout, and really changing what you're doing or changing the exercise you want to perform, and sort of change up your routine a little bit. It's okay to add new exercises, but it's more important to master your existing exercise. Alrighty, guys. So that's pretty much all I have for you guys today as far as this particular topic. I hope that you found it helpful and valuable, and I hope that it gave you a little bit more insight on sort of how to approach workouts instead of just focusing, solely on trying to constantly shift your routine day in and day out. Now, two, what I do want to mention is that with an exercise routine, like I said, when I'm talking about these topics, you do have to take into consideration all the other elements that sort of play into progression. So it's not necessarily just about your workouts, but your nutrition and your recovery side of things have to sort of complement each other in order for the results to show from your workouts. So you have to keep those elements in mind as well. So just because I'm talking about this singular topic doesn't mean that there's not other things that you have to put, that you can't just put into consideration, or that you should put into consideration, I should say, because you have to have all of those elements balanced in order for those results to show. So I just want to mention that in advance, because this is only one little piece that you kind of have to think about when it comes to, progress in your workouts, in your overall, fitness routine in general. So, with all that being said, guys, I really appreciate your time. I hope that you found this helpful and valuable, and I hope that it gave you more insight on this topic, especially related to workouts and progression, and how mastering those existing workouts are going to make the most of your results as you progress. So, I do have some information here on screen. I do have my phone number as well as my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. I do, guys, want you to really check that website out if you're interested in learning about online fitness coaching, or if you just want to check out some of the resources that I have on there for you to access as well. I constantly try to keep it updated to give you guys new information on there. But thank you guys once again for your time. I will have another live stream, of course, next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and I'll have another topic to share with you guys in that stream. But thank you guys once again. I hope you guys have a great new year, and I'm looking forward to talking about more related to fitness, nutrition, and recovery as we head forward. So, thank you guys again, and I will see you guys in the next live stream. So, thank you guys once again for watching.